Hello everyone and welcome to this video tutorial on how to apply the law on ABH to a criminal law scenario. In this tutorial we're going to be looking at the Lucy and Chris petrol bomb scenario. We're going to quickly recap what the law on ABH is before looking at how we apply that idea structure to an ABH scenario. And ABH is the trickiest of the non-fatal offences to apply to a scenario because as part of ABH, you must also have an assault or a battery as well. So how you apply the law here is a little bit more complicated than it is just for a standard assault or a standard battery question. But we're going to tackle it together in this tutorial and hopefully you'll feel confident on answering one of these yourselves at the end. Let's start by having a look at the situation we've been given. So the situation's this: Lucy sends Chris a threatening email saying that she's going to petrol bomb his house. Chris is so frightened that he suffers PTSD, which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. And you're being asked to advise Lucy on her criminal liability. Now, straight away, you can see here from the question, your question on the real exam might be like this. You're not told what crime or what offences to be talking about. You're simply asked to advise Lucy. So this is a challenging question because you would have to look at this scenario and work out what crime it is. Obviously for us, we know because the title tells us here and it's an ABH tutorial. Okay, but if you got that in the exam, you'd have to figure out it was ABH. So before we look at the other issues, it's worth just looking and seeing, okay, would I have recognised this was ABH if I didn't know that's what we were looking at? Remember that for ABH, you need either an assault or a battery, which has led to basically a small injury. Remember, we never say it in the exam, but a way of remembering ABH is a bit hurt. Okay, this is where you've got an assault or a battery which has led to a small injury, like a bruise or something like that typically. So if we look at this situation, we've got a threatening email. So hopefully straight away when you're looking at that, you're thinking, okay, it's words, it's a threat. So assault might be jumping into your mind now, hopefully. So I'm going to highlight that as we would in the exam. So it's a threat, it's written words, so it looks like an assault. Hopefully you're thinking of a case. What case are you thinking of? Hopefully Constanza has sprung to mind. So Constanza tells us that letters can be an assault. Now, although this is an email, the principle would still apply because it's still a written word. So it might be handy in the exam to jot Constanza nearby just to remind you as it's popped into your head. So I've sent him a threatening email saying that I'm going to petrol bomb his house. And Chris is so frightened, he suffers PTSD. So I would be highlighting frightened because it seems like that's indicating maybe the actus reus of assault is met because he is scared. An issue we're going to have here, of course, though, is that I've sent him an email saying I'm going to bomb his house, but is that going to be immediate enough? I'd be jotting down Smith and Woking by the side here because although the threat doesn't have to be instantaneous, it has to be imminent. With an email, I suppose I could have been sending it from my phone right outside his house. So it could be immediate enough, but hopefully you're thinking of those issues as you're reading through. He's certainly frightened though. And if it was just threatening email and he's frightened, that'd be an assault. But we can see that as a result of this, he's suffered PTSD. And PTSD is a psychiatric injury. So again, I'm hoping a case might be jumping into your mind now. Chamfook would be the case that we'd be talking about there, because in Chamfook, it was said that psychiatric injury can be classed as ABH. So just reading through it and highlighting it, I'm already working out in my mind, okay, looks like I've got an assault, which has led to a small injury that Chamfook says could be ABH. So it's looking like Lucy's guilty of ABH, but we have got that immediacy issue there. Before we look at the idea structure, I think it might be useful just to remind ourselves of what the law is on assault and ABH, because in this one, of course, it's an assault which has potentially led to ABH. Remember, in another scenario, it might be a battery which has led to ABH. So if it had said Lucy smacks Chris in the face and he gets a big black eye, that wouldn't be an assault leading to ABH, obviously, because if I've smacked him, if I've punched him in the face, that's a battery. That's the application of unlawful force. So that would be a battery leading to ABH. But here we're looking at an assault which has led to ABH. So on this slide here, I've just got a quick reminder of what the law on assault is. Remember, you've got a separate video tutorial which goes through all of the law on assault and battery. So it might be a good idea to look at that one, and also to look at the video tutorial that goes through the law on ABH before you come and tackle this scenario. This is just a quick recap here, so it's fresh in our mind when we're looking at this Lucy and Chris scenario. So for an assault, we need an act or words which causes the victim to apprehend the infliction of immediate unlawful force with intentional recklessness as to whether the fear or the apprehension is caused. And we've got some key cases here, and I've mentioned a couple of those already. Constanza was the letters one. Smith and Woking, really important for whether it's going to be immediate enough or not. And this is showing you as well, of course, that for ABH, you also have to know the law on assault or battery really well, because you're not going to be able to apply ABH well if you don't know assault and battery. So that's assault. Let's remind ourselves of what the law on ABH is then. For ABH, our actus reus is that we need an assault or battery which caused ABH. And that's why we're talking about assault in this scenario, because there was an assault, the email, which led to ABH, the PTSD. But as I said a minute ago, if I punched Chris and he got a black eye, it would then be a battery which has caused ABH, the black eye. Okay, so you're not going to be applying both of them. It's going to be an assault or a battery which has led to the ABH. And remember that Miller tells us that ABH is any hurt or injury calculated to interfere with the health or comfort of the victim. And the fact it's talking about comfort is indicating that it's a small injury, okay? It's not going to be something very serious. That would then be GBH, of course. We're looking for small injuries that interfere with health and comfort. We've got some key cases here. I mentioned Chamfook earlier because that tells us that psychiatric injury can amount to ABH. And that's really the only way that you're going to get an assault leading to ABH. Okay, in the other situations, it's more common for a battery to lead to ABH. And our defendant must intend or be reckless as to whether the victim apprehends or is subjected to the unlawful force. So the mens rea for ABH is that they have to have the mens rea for the assault or the battery. Now we've looked at that, let's have a look at how IDEA works when we're using ABH. So as usual, we're using IDEA. So on this slide, I've set out the IDEA. And this is for whenever we're applying the law on section 47 ABH. So first thing you're going to do is identify that your character might be liable for ABH. Okay, so I've said Lucy might have committed ABH under section 47 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861 when she sent Chris a threatening email which caused him to suffer from PTSD. Can you see how I've been quite specific here? I've pointed out it was when she sent him the email and when he got the post-traumatic stress disorder. We've only got a mini scenario here, but in the exam you're going to have a much bigger scenario with a lot more going on. So you need to be very clear about when might she be guilty of ABH. Point out in relation to the email and this illness. Your D, as always, you just define whatever crime you've said that it's going to be. So you've said it's going to be ABH, so you list the actus reus of section 47. So actus reus of section 47 ABH is an assault or a battery which caused ABH. Then just list the mens rea of section 47 ABH. The mens rea is intentional recklessness as to whether the victim apprehended or was subjected to the unlawful force. Now, this is where applying the law on Section 47 ABH is more challenging than applying the law on other non-fatal offences. Because you need an assault or a battery first, in your E, the first thing you're going to have to explain is that there must have been an assault or a battery before there can be ABH. So you must explain the law on assault or battery here before you start talking about ABH. So I've put here whichever it was in your scenario. So for us, we're going to explain assault. So you would say, firstly, there must have been an assault or battery. In this case, it's an assault. An assault is. And then you would define the actus reus and mens rea of assault using all your cases. So at that point, if I just skip back to the right slide that I showed you a minute ago, sorry, just finding it. So in your E, the first thing you would explain is an assault, because we've got an assault which has led to ABH. So you explain the actus reus and the mens rea, you explain all of these cases. Okay, I've switched us back over now. So once you've explained your assault or your battery, but in our case it's an assault, then explain ABH. So that's the point where you would go to your ABH and explain that with cases. And for the sake of completeness, I'll switch back to that slide. So this is where you would then be explaining Miller and all of the other cases on ABH. So your E, when you're doing ABH, is going to be quite chunky because it's going to have assault or battery and then it's going to have ABH in it. Okay, so that's what makes it more challenging. And then your application is a bit more challenging as well because, and I've broken it down precisely what you need to do. Firstly, you need to say whether the actus reus of an assault or battery was met. Okay, so in our case, we'd be talking about assault. So I'd be saying, Lucy has sent Chris a threatening email. This meets the actus reus of an assault because Constanza says letters can amount to an assault. It's probably going to be imminent using Smith and Woking because she could have sent the email from a phone outside his house, so he could think she's going to get him imminently. And then I would say whether the mens rea of an assault has been met. So I'd be saying there, Lucy clearly deliberately sent him this email to try and scare him. That was the whole purpose of saying she's going to petrol bomb his house. The only reason you would say that is to scare someone. So she clearly has intention to cause him to apprehend the infliction of immediate unlawful force. And then say whether this has led to the injury. So I would say, so we've got a completed assault and this has led to post-traumatic stress disorder. Using the case of Chan-Fook, this meets the actus reus for ABH. It meets the Miller definition as well. And she had the mens rea for this because we've already established she had the mens rea for the assault. So they're the steps that you go through with ABH. On my next slide, I've gone through an answer to this question. And it might be useful for you to pause the video here so that you can have a read of it. I've also colour-coded it for you. Green is the actus reus, blue is the mens rea, and you've got your IDEA down the side. Mine's very bullet pointy, so you can see what content needs to go in, but in the exam you need to write full sentences, explain your cases fully. So you can see here I've identified that Lucy might be liable for an assault occasioning ABH. I've defined the AR and MR of ABH. I've explained assault with cases. I've explained ABH with cases. And then I've gone on to my application. I've said she meets the AR of assault because an email can be an assault and I think it's going to be immediate enough. She also meets the mens rea of assault because she clearly intends to scare Chris. PTSD can be ABH, Chan-Fook, as long as it's recognised by a doctor. Therefore, she's liable for ABH because we've got a completed assault which has led to ABH and she intended for Chris to apprehend the infliction of immediate unlawful force.